Have you ever felt overwhelmed, as if you were struggling alone and didn't know how to go on? We all face moments like that, but God sees your pain, understands your weariness, and is working for you, even when everything seems at a standstill. In this video, we'll explore 10 principles based on God's Word and the teachings of C.S. Lewis to help you find peace and renew your faith, even on the most difficult days. Before we continue, I want to invite you to be part of this community of faith. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive reflections and teachings that help you renew your trust in God and find purpose in the midst of challenges. Don't miss any content that can transform your spiritual journey and bring more peace and hope to your heart. Let's grow in faith together. Life isn't always easy. We all face challenging times when we feel exhausted, overwhelmed, or even hopeless. Maybe you've been praying for weeks, months, or even years for a change, but nothing seems to happen. That feeling of endless waiting and silence can be discouraging. We often ask ourselves, is God listening to me? Does He care about what I'm going through? These questions are part of the journey of faith. However, the truth is that God never abandons us. He is present, even when we don't realize it. Periods of difficulty and silence are not signs of rejection, but invitations to trust Him more deeply. These moments are opportunities for God to work on our character, strengthen our faith, and shape our confidence. Today, we're going to explore how to turn these difficult situations into occasions to grow spiritually. Today, I want to share 10 powerful principles that will help you face moments of silence, waiting, and spiritual weariness with confidence and faith. Inspired by the teachings of C.S. Lewis and the Bible, these principles will show you how to find rest, understand the purpose of delays, and trust in God's work even when we can't see it. Get ready to renew your faith and discover how God is always at work in your life. Our soul was created to depend exclusively on God. C.S. Lewis uses a powerful analogy to explain this. Just as a car cannot run without the right fuel, neither can we live fully without God's presence. He is the only source that can satisfy our deepest needs and bring us true purpose. When we try to seek satisfaction in other things, we inevitably feel empty and disoriented. The world offers us countless distractions: success, possessions, status, and even relationships. While these things can bring some momentary relief, they don't have the power to fill the spiritual void. It's like trying to quench your thirst with salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. Only God can provide the bread of life that our soul so desperately craves. In John 6:35, Jesus says, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never thirst." These words invite us to put aside temporary sources of satisfaction and look to Him for the sustenance that never fails. God doesn't just offer what we need, He is what we need. Perhaps you are feeling overwhelmed or exhausted, looking for something that will bring you peace and purpose. God's invitation is simple. Let Him be the source of your sustenance. This means trusting Him in every aspect of your life, surrendering your fears, anxieties, and doubts to Him. Today, take a moment to reflect. Where have you been looking for strength and purpose? Ask God to be your source of sustenance, and you will see how He transforms not only your circumstances, but also your heart. Even when we are tired, God offers us rest. He knows our struggles and is always ready to renew our strength. Life can be exhausting. There are times when it feels like we're carrying an unbearable weight, trying to cope with everything on our own. At such times, it's natural to feel like we're on the edge, without the energy to go on. But the good news is that God sees all this. He knows your weariness, understands your struggles, and is by your side, ready to renew your strength. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus gives a comforting invitation. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." These words are not just a momentary relief, but a promise of true and lasting rest. God doesn't just observe your difficulties, He participates in them, carrying the weight you can't bear alone. C.S. Lewis reminds us that our strength comes from God, not from ourselves. It's like a child trying to carry something too heavy. When the father notices the child's effort, He immediately intervenes to help him. That's how God is with us. He not only sees our struggles, but acts to lighten our load and strengthen us. We often insist on carrying everything alone, as if depending on God were a sign of weakness. But in reality, handing our worries over to Him is an act of faith and wisdom. It means recognizing that He is powerful enough to deal with whatever ails us. Today, reflect. What has been weighing on your life? What areas do you need to hand over to God? In prayer, confess your difficulties to Him and ask for strength and direction. God doesn't just listen. He answers, renewing your energy and calming your heart. Even in weariness, God is the inexhaustible source of rest and renewal. He is aware of everything you face and will use these moments to shape something greater in your life. Waiting is one of the biggest challenges we face in our spiritual journey. When we ask God for something and nothing seems to happen, we're tempted to think that He's not listening or that He's forgotten about us. But the truth is that God never wastes a moment, and periods of waiting have a greater purpose than we realize. C.S. Lewis describes these moments as part of a molding process. God is not just adjusting small details, He is building something significant in our lives. Isaiah 46:10 reminds us, "I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is yet to come." This gives us confidence that God sees the whole picture, even when everything seems at a standstill. Waiting is not a period of inactivity, but a time of preparation. Think of a farmer planting a seed. He doesn't see the fruit immediately, but trusts in the invisible process taking place beneath the earth. So too is the waiting in our lives. God is working behind the scenes, strengthening our spiritual roots and aligning circumstances so that at the right time, His will be fulfilled. In Lamentations 3:25-26, we find great encouragement. "The Lord is good to those whose hope is in Him, to those who seek Him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." This reminds us that waiting is not passive, but an active act of trust and hope in God. If you are going through a period of waiting, ask yourself, what is God teaching me now? How is He shaping my character? Trust that He is preparing something that goes beyond what you can imagine. He doesn't just see your future, He is building it with love and perfection. Waiting teaches us patience and challenges us to trust, even when we don't have all the answers. And while we wait, we face another battle, resisting the temptation to take control ourselves. When we face periods of waiting or uncertainty, it's natural to want to take control. The feeling that something has to be done leads us to try to sort things out on our own. However, this urgency often puts us in even more complicated situations. Trusting in God's timing is an exercise in faith and patience, and that's exactly what He calls us to do. Proverbs 3:5-6 teaches us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge the Lord, and He will direct your paths." This reminds us that God is in control, even when we don't understand what's going on. A classic example of this struggle for control is the story of Abraham and Sarah. God had promised that they would have a son, but time seemed to be against them. So in a moment of impatience, they decided to help God. Abraham had a son with Hagar, Sarah's handmaid, which resulted in complications and conflicts. Despite this, God was faithful to His promise, and Isaac was born at the right time. This story teaches us that forcing situations can create problems that could be avoided if we simply trusted God. C.S. Lewis describes trying to control our lives as a futile effort. He reminds us that the more we try to solve everything ourselves, the further we move away from the peace that God wants to give us. True freedom comes from surrendering control to Him, trusting that His plan is always better. Today, reflect, are there areas in your life where you are trying to force a solution? Take these concerns to God in prayer, ask for direction, and hand over control to Him. God doesn't need our help to fulfill His promises. He calls us to trust and wait. Even when everything around you seems out of control, remember that God is in charge. And He often uses even silence to teach us something profound. God's silences can be disconcerting. When we pray fervently and don't receive immediate answers, it's easy to think that God is distant or indifferent. But these moments of silence are profound opportunities for us to grow in faith and trust. God is not absent. He is at work in our lives in ways that we often fail to notice. C.S. Lewis compares these periods to when a teacher observes his students during an exam. The teacher doesn't speak, but is present, attentive to every detail. That's how God is with us. His silence is not abandonment, but a way of teaching us and preparing us for what is to come. The story of Joseph is a clear example of God's work. Even in the midst of silence, Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, unjustly imprisoned and seemingly forgotten for years. However, God was orchestrating everything for a greater purpose. When Joseph finally became a leading figure in Egypt, he was able to say to his brothers, "You planned evil against me, but God has turned it to good." Genesis 50:20. God's silence was never inactivity. It was a period of preparation. These moments of silence teach us to trust God, even without visible evidence of His action. Psalm 46:10 invites us, "Be still and know that I am God." This stillness is essential for hearing His voice and feeling His presence in the midst of storms. If you are facing a moment of divine silence, ask yourself, what is God teaching me now? How can I trust Him more? Use this time to deepen your communion with Him through prayer and meditation on His Word. God's silences are never empty. They are full of purpose, and they often precede great transformations in our lives. It is in this silence that God prepares the ground for something greater, even if it involves delays that we don't fully understand. If this video has spoken to your heart and helped you see moments of waiting and silence in a new way, don't forget to like it. This will help this message reach more people who may be in need of this reflection. And tell me in the comments, which of these principles do you feel is most challenging to apply? Your experience may inspire others to trust God more. God's delays can be frustrating. When our prayers don't seem to be answered or when the results we expect are slow in coming, it's natural to feel discouraged. However, God's delays are not accidental. They are full of purpose. It is in these moments that He works not only in the circumstances around us, but also in our hearts. C.S. Lewis teaches us that God does not hurry because He is more interested in what we are becoming than in what we are receiving. He compares this process to construction. While we want small repairs done, God is planning something much bigger, a complete transformation, like an architect building a palace instead of a simple house. The story of Abraham and Sarah exemplifies this perfectly. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but it took 25 years for this promise to be fulfilled. During this time, Abraham and Sarah faced doubts and even tried to help God, which led to challenging consequences. However, when the right time came, Isaac was born, and God's plan was fulfilled perfectly. These periods of waiting teach us patience and trust. Lamentations 3:25-26 encourages us. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in Him, to those who seek Him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Waiting is not a passive period. It is a time of preparation where God shapes our character and prepares us to receive His blessings. If you are facing a delay, ask yourself, what is God trying to teach me at this time? How can I grow during this wait? Trust that He is working behind the scenes, aligning everything to His perfect plan. As we face delays, we are invited to cultivate an essential virtue, patience. And it is this patience that prepares us to receive all that God has in store for us. Patience is a difficult virtue to cultivate, but absolutely essential in our walk with God. In a world where everything seems to happen instantly, waiting on God's timing can seem frustrating and even challenging. However, patience is not just about waiting, but about how we wait, with trust and hope in the Lord. C.S. Lewis reminds us that what we often consider interruptions or setbacks are actually part of God's plan for our lives. Romans 5:3-4 also reinforces this idea. Tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. So every period of waiting is an opportunity for growth where God shapes us to become stronger and more like Christ. Think of a farmer. He plants the seeds and waits patiently for the harvest. He can't rush the growth, but trusts in the natural process. So is patience in our spiritual life. It teaches us to trust in God's plan, even when we don't see the fruit immediately. Patience is not passive. It is an act of faith. It means continuing to pray, seeking God's will and being faithful, even when it seems that nothing is changing. It's choosing to trust that He is in control, shaping the circumstances as well as our hearts. If you are facing a situation in which you need to exercise patience, ask yourself, am I waiting on the Lord with confidence, or am I trying to rush His plan? Take these doubts to God in prayer. Ask Him to strengthen your faith while you wait. As we develop patience, we realize that it not only prepares us for God's blessings, but also transforms our view of waiting. And in the midst of this patience, we find something even more precious, the peace that God offers us, even when the answers have not yet arrived. Waiting is challenging, but it's even harder when we let anxiety and fear take over our thoughts. We often worry about what is to come or regret what hasn't happened, losing the peace that God wants us to have. However, waiting doesn't have to be marked by restlessness. It can be a time of tranquility and trust. Psalm 46:10 invites us to do something powerful. Be still and know that I am God. This verse reminds us that peace does not lie in controlling circumstances, but in trusting the one who is in control of everything. God is not taken by surprise by our challenges. He knows the beginning and the end of our journey and is working on every detail, even when everything seems uncertain. C.S. Lewis describes peace as part of the process of transformation that God carries out in our lives. He compares it to a complete overhaul. At first, the changes may be small, but over time, God begins to shape everything into something much bigger than we imagined. This transformation can be uncomfortable, but it is always for our good. Embracing peace in waiting requires us to surrender our concerns to God. This means praying, trusting in His promises, and allowing Him to guide our steps. Jesus gave us this assurance in John 14:27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Today reflect, what is stealing your peace? It could be worry about the future, fear, or even an unfulfilled desire. Take it to God in prayer. Ask Him to renew your mind and fill your heart with the peace that comes from trusting in His love and perfect plan. As we find peace in waiting, we are also invited to recognize that God is always at work in our lives, even when we can't see it. Often when we're waiting, we're tempted to believe that God isn't acting because we can't see immediate results. However, the reality is that God is always at work, even when His actions are invisible to us. He works behind the scenes, lining up details, transforming circumstances, and preparing our hearts to receive his blessings. C.S. Lewis describes this invisible work as the work of a great architect. While we wait for small adjustments to be made, God is designing something much bigger, a palace worthy of his dwelling. Sometimes what seems like a delay or an interruption is actually part of God's greater plan, which goes far beyond what we can imagine. In the Bible, the story of Esther is a clear example of God's invisible work. Throughout the book, God's name is not mentioned once, but his presence is evident in every detail. He was orchestrating everything, from Esther's rise to queen to the events that saved the Jewish people from destruction. God was acting behind the scenes, turning what seemed like an ordinary situation into a miracle. Proverbs 19:21 reminds us, "Many are the plans in a man's heart, but what prevails is the purpose of the Lord." This means that even when our circumstances don't make sense, we can trust that God is in control and that his purpose is always good. Reflect. In which areas of your life do you feel like nothing is happening? Maybe it's a relationship, an opportunity, or a prayer that doesn't seem to have been answered. Trust that God is at work, aligning all things to his perfect plan. Even when we can't see or understand, God never stops working on our behalf. He is building something greater, and his faithfulness assures us that the best is yet to come. Trusting in God's faithfulness is the basis of a solid faith, especially at times when we face silence, delays, or challenges. When the answers seem distant or our circumstances don't change, it's easy to wonder if God is really in control. But the Bible repeatedly assures us that God is faithful and that his promises never fail. Romans 8:28 reminds us, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." This truth gives us confidence that even when we face difficult situations, God is working for our good. His faithfulness does not depend on our circumstances. It is a reflection of his unchanging character. C.S. Lewis describes God's faithfulness as a work that goes beyond our expectations. He teaches us that God doesn't just adjust the small details of our lives, but carries out complete transformations that lead us to a greater purpose. This can be difficult to understand at the time, but over time, we realize that every delay and every challenge was aligned with God's perfect plan. The story of Lazarus in John 11 is a powerful example of God's faithfulness. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he didn't immediately go to meet him. It seemed that Jesus had taken his time and that all was lost. However, at the right time, he performed an even greater miracle, the resurrection of Lazarus. This story shows us that God is never late, his timing is perfect, and his faithfulness is unwavering. Today, reflect on the areas of your life where you need to trust God more. Surrender your fears, anxieties, and expectations to him. Remember that he is faithful and that at the right time, his promises will be fulfilled. When we trust in God's faithfulness, we find the strength to carry on, knowing that he never abandons us. He is always by our side, guiding every step of our journey. Getting this far shows that you are willing to trust God more and allow him to work in your life, even in the most difficult times. The principles explored today are not just ideas, but practical tools to strengthen your faith and help you see challenges in a new light. Remember that every moment of silence, waiting, or uncertainty is an opportunity for God to shape your heart and align your plans with his. He never wastes a single experience. By surrendering your worries and trusting in his faithfulness, you are taking an important step towards the purpose he has for you. Don't let doubts or fears stop you from moving forward. Trust that God is in control and that he is writing an incredible story in your life. He is faithful and his promises are always fulfilled at the right time. If this video spoke to your heart and you believe that these principles can help others, subscribe to the channel now. Activate the bell to receive content that strengthens faith and brings inspiration for daily challenges. Like this video to help this message reach more people, and share in the comments how you are applying these teachings in your life. Your story could be the motivation someone needs today. As we draw this moment to a close, I want you to remember something essential. God never forgets you. Even when everything seems to be falling apart, when God's silence weighs heavy, or when the wait seems endless, he is at work. His promises are true and his actions are driven by love and perfection. C.S. Lewis reminds us that God doesn't make superficial adjustments to our lives. He transforms us completely, preparing us for something much greater. This process, although difficult and often uncomfortable, is proof of the deep care he has for you. Every challenge, every wait, and even every tear is part of a much bigger plan. Today, I want you to leave this video with the certainty that God is by your side, shaping your story and preparing a future full of purpose and hope. Trust him, even when circumstances seem uncertain. He is faithful and always delivers what he promises. If this content has blessed your life, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to continue receiving messages of faith and hope. In the comments, share what impacted you the most. Your experience may inspire others who are also facing challenges. Remember, God is writing something beautiful in your story. Keep trusting, walking, and believing because His faithfulness never fails. You are never alone.